California Baptist University, an online and professional studies in organizational communication. Professor Beth Groves. This case study is Outsourcing US Intelligence, presented by Group 5, Linda L. Cirolia, Aisha L. Davis-Morgan, Victoria P. Gonzalez, Gina E. Meeks, and Amaris R. Rodriguez. Case Analysis Case Study 18. The following slides will present summary of the organization, the key stakeholders, problem defined, data related to the problem, actions taken, and analysis using principles and theories of organizational communication, alternative actions, and recommended course of action. The case of Outsourcing US Intelligence was built upon the co-mingled relationship of three entities. These entities consisted of the U.S. intelligence community as government organization, Capstone, which was a government-funded program consisting of a network of private sector contractors, and AFPAX Insider, a private sector run subscription news service and a database geared towards U.S. military personnel. In 2008, U.S. Department of Defense officials Michael D. Furlong developed a network of private sector contractors to assist in gathering information about Afghanistan's political and tribal cultures. The Lockheed Martin program that engaged subcontracted firms to achieve this end was named Capstone. Additionally, business partner Easton Jordan and Robert Young Pelton indirectly participated in Capstone through the development of subscription news service and database called the AFPAX Insider. Key stakeholders from the military include Senior U.S. Defense Department official Michael D. Furlong, U.S. Defense Secretary Robert Gates, Top Aide Michael Decker, Commander of U.S. Forces in Afghanistan General David McKiernan, Major General Michael Flynn, Commander of U.S. Central Command General Davis Petraeus, U.S. Military Director of Strategic Communication in Afghanistan Rear Admiral Gregory Smith, Top U.S. Commander in Afghanistan General Stanley McChrystal. From the private sector, we have the stakeholders, which are Easton Jordan, former CNN executive, Robert Young Pelton, who is an author, subscription news service AFPAX Insider. And one of the key stakeholders from the private sector was Lockheed Martin Incorporated, who was the maker of Capstone subcontracted firms, which included psychological operations, special forces operatives, strategic influence alternatives, American International Security Corporation, and International Media Ventures. The problem defined. The New York Times reported on March 14, 2010 that Michael D. Furlong, a senior U.S. Defense Department official, had under the cover of a benign governmental information gathering program developed a network of private sector contractors to help track and kill suspected militants in Afghanistan and Pakistan. According to the Pentagon, officials used some of the information gathered under Capstone to plan lethal strikes against militants. The Pentagon was alerted to the possible illegality of Capstone in December 2009 with the closing of the program in May 2010. What followed in the months after the New York Times story broke were formal Pentagon and Air Force investigations, classified reports, blame shifting between the involved military and private sector actors, and the use of strategic and opportunistic discursive resources by both military officials and Capstone participants to persuade themselves and others of the ethically of their practices. This case gave fuel to the already active debate around the ethical ambiguities and blurred boundaries that exist among government agencies, commercial firms, and the concepts of intelligence and information gathering to include how intelligence stakeholders leverage national security and commercial discourses to their advantage. Some of the data related to the problem includes the Capstone, which is a $24 million Lockheed Martin program, the 100 corporate members of Intelligence and National Security Alliance, The post-Cold War peace dividend reduced defense and intelligence budgets by more than 30%. The post-9/11 contracting with our outsourcing to private sector corporations increased to an estimated 70% of overall U.S. intelligence spending on goods, services, and personnel. And in 2009, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence acknowledged that private sector contractors constituted nearly 1/3 of the U.S. intelligence community workforce. And $40 billion in private intelligence sector consists of major defense contractors. Actions taken. Case study Outsourcing US Intelligence explored an actual case of the use of private sector contractors by the U.S. Defense Department in Afghanistan and Pakistan, in which some of the activities were considered to be illegal and unethical. The circumstances surrounding the case fueled a debate on a variety of topics to include but not limited to national security, ethics of intelligence outsourcing, lawfulness, efficiency versus effectiveness, profit maximization versus national interests, transparency and accountability, and cumulative in a display of the use of discursive resources by key actors to defend actions and positions. The actions in this case included the U.S. Defense Department directly development of a network of private sector contractors, namely Lockheed Martin, which was the capstone project, Eason Jordan, and Robert Young, the AFPAC's insider, participated in information gathering about Afghanistan's political and tribal cultures and to obtain ground truth during military actions in Afghanistan and Pakistan. They also subcontractors would occasionally glean detailed information about suspected militants and the location of insurgent camps, and according to the Pentagon officials, used some of the information gathered on their capstone to plant lethal strikes against militants. Executive orders, institutional memoranda, and the U.S. Code generally prohibit private sector contractors from conducting intelligence operations and other inherently governmental activities. Intelligence outsourcing represents an ethical quarantine around interpretation of the concept of intelligence collection and informational gathering, and their contextual application for the military and private sector. Oscillation between discourses of national security and commerce enabled capstone participants to opportunistically account for the ethically of their practices in the face of implicit and explicit charge of immorality. Commander of U.S. forces in Afghanistan, General David McKiernan, used strategic ambiguity to shift blame to capstone participants, depicting himself as simply interested in gaining vague yet useful atmospherics, not the intelligence that capstone participants gathered to target and kill militants. While analyzing this case study, the principal organizational communication that applies to the problem at hand is the scalar chain, a classical approach explained by Fayol's principle of management. The scalar chain is the principal process that an organization should be arranged in a strictly vertical hierarchy, and that communication should be largely limited to this vertical flow. The flow and limits of the communication are extremely important in this case study, as the communication that is made to be private and confidential becomes utilized for an alternative motives leading to the search of killing suspect militants. Applying the scalar chain principle to this particular case would assure that gathered confidential information would in fact be kept as confidential and not abused for leverage and/or personal gain. Additionally, principles of standardization, specialization, and predictability from the communications of classical approaches can be utilized to defend a part of the issue. In the communication process, there should be content, direction of communication flow, mode or channel of communication, and the style of communication. Furlong mentions that ethical norms vary from one organization to the next, and that leaves room for error in communication and ethical standards and boundaries that are part of the questions of ethical decision-making. We can see clearly that control of organizational discourse is displayed in the case study as stakeholders use discourse for dominion and control. Mumby states, narratives provide members with accounts of organizing and those accounting potentially legitimate dominion, forms of organization, reality, and leads to discursive closure in the sense of restricting the interpretation and meaning that can be attached to an organizational activity. That's found in Miller, page 105. Stakeholders try to justify their actions of abuse through discourse by attempting to make sense of their decisions in ways that defend their positions. Alternative actions. Although outsourcing to private sectors, corporations have been an integral part of the U.S. military operations for many years. Speculation regarding whether outsourcing might improve agencies' efficiencies and effectiveness calls for evaluation of alternative actions. The U.S. military operation is considered as a high reliable organization. Its function requires extraordinary attention to avoid major errors which could lead to destruction. The high standards of discretion must be upheld by skilled performance and insistence on a high degree of discretion and appreciation for the tension between system experts and system operations. Miller, page 93. The simplest way of containing many of these problems would be to forbid certain activities from being delegated or outsourced to private contractors at all. There must be clear boundaries between the government and the private sector, otherwise individual rights that are necessary for a healthy democracy cannot be protected. The scale of activity should be reduced and outsourcing should be appropriately limited. In addition, the U.S. government and Congress should change policy in order to protect the government's core competencies infringements by private interest. Such as Department of Defense should be provided the ultimate resource to enable the military to maintain this function internally. And Congress would have to approve an increase in government spending, as this change would require the funding to support this initiative. In an effort to promote stronger organizational culture, the government could follow Edgar Schein's onion model, more specifically from the perspective of a high reliability organization. This model relates closely to the case study because goal outsourcing is to retrieve crucial information for the purpose of national security. Level 1 of the model would consist of a highly trained individuals as well as high transparency between the government and contractors. Level 2 of the model would be values such as a strong structure basis on integrity and communication. All individuals would be involved and given input regardless of their status. In level 3, the model would be the assumption that outsourcing is well-intentioned with a high degree of accountability. If steps are not taken to ensure that government and private contractors are working together effectively, there could be a chance for error, which would weaken the government ability to protect the state and the citizens from national crisis. This concludes our presentation of Outsourcing US Intelligence. Thank you.